Hello, I'm Captain James L. Loatche. I served in the U.S. Army during the Vietnam era. I was in the service for 8 years, and I guess the most memorable event of my military career is when I served at Hamburger Hill, which was one of the most devastating battles of the war. I was critically wounded there with wounds to my neck and to my legs, and there were numerous soldiers who died and who were wounded there, and Hamburger Hill really took its toll. In fact, it was so popular that a movie was made about that battle, describing the horror and the sacrifice that we made as veterans and soldiers during that campaign. It was one of the most memorable experiences that I can recall, and years later, I still have thoughts and reflections on what we went through, and it made me very proud to have served with many young men who didn't make it back, but even more proud to be an American soldier defending our country for the rights and privileges of all people. Even though the war was not popular, those of us who served in it believed that we served in a great cause that helped produce the cause of freedom and democracy, and a signal around the world that the U.S. would always be there. After serving Vietnam, I was so critically wounded that I had to eventually retire from the service. And from there, I went on to Vanderbilt University, and I became an ordained minister. And today I serve as assistant pastor of Grace Baptist Church, and I've been in the ministry since leaving the service. But in all, I'm often asked, about my military experience and the things that we shared there. And it's always a privilege to share with others and people whom I come in contact with the experiences that we endured. And we hope that in years to come and in the future to come, that we will continue to see young men and women who are willing to step up and to serve whenever we're called upon. We have to remember that the freedoms that we enjoy today is because of the sacrifice that our young men and women and those who are willing to serve are able to give in devotion and dedication to the country. And again, I am very thankful and very proud that, I was able to be there at the most crucial time of the war. I still regret the many lost men and young people who were just out of high school, many of them, and just starting life. We often, it saddens me to think about those lives that were lost. Oftentimes remember how on one occasion there at Hamburger Hill, and the battle lasted for 10 days. I was wounded on the 6th day of the war, but one of the most horrifying events I remember was when we had some wounded soldiers, and we called in the helicopter medevac to rescue those soldiers. And as the helicopter was hovering over the wounded to evac them out of the combat zone, the helicopter itself was shot down, and it fell burning right in the middle of all of the troops. And many of them were burned, and they were killed as a result of the helicopter falling in the middle of them. I can still remember and see the horror on the faces of those standing around and seeing the terror of our young soldiers who were dying. And, for those who later criticized the war and who criticized while the war was going on, I would happily reflect back to them of those young men who so willingly gave their lives and who sacrificed their lives. As I said, young men, 18, 19, in their early 20s, who gave their lives for the cause of freedom. And I would look back and proudly say to them, you know, that you weren't there. If you had been there, then you would have a different opinion about what happened. I think one of the most saddening experiences that I remember from the Vietnam War is when we returned home from Vietnam. I know we were advised not to wear our uniforms because when we landed back in the States, there were hecklers, there were people who were throwing balls, there were people who were cursing and calling us names. And I had to think, after all that we've been through, that's what we came back to. Later on, through the years, the ideas and the feelings have softened, and people began to realize and they understand now what we went through, that we were serving a cause for freedom, and that our devotion and service made a difference. And I can truly say that I'm proud to have served, and if I had the opportunity, I'd be happy to do it again.
My name is Alan Harkrader. I enlisted in the Army in 1946. War was over, but I grew up in high school during the war, and everybody expected to be drafted or go into the service. So the war ended, but I enlisted with 4 of my buddies and sent to Fort Lewis, Washington for engineer basic. Supposed to be 16 weeks, but because they were trying to get the World War II veterans home, they cut our basic training short and sent us overseas to replace the veterans over there. I got to Japan as part of the occupation force and volunteered for the 11th Airborne. Went to jump school there and glider school, and spent about 9 months in Japan before I came home. It was just occupation force, so it was all peacetime duty, so to speak. And when I got home, I used my GI Bill to go to Bradley University. I got 2 years in at Bradley, and I was, of course, in the reserves. World War II was over, but Korea started. And I was reactivated in my reserve unit and was called to go back to Korea. I was in a local reserve unit, an engineer unit known as an ash and trash unit. It was a unit of under 100 men and officers. It was actually designed to run an army camp. So our first duty was to go to Camp Carson, which a great deal of it had been closed after the war, and reopen the camp. As soon as we got the barracks back in operation, we were sent overseas and became part of an engineer group that was maintaining roads and rebuilding bridges and maintaining the roads. And our main duty there was just to fix everything that was broken. One of our jobs was to spread aggregate on the muddy roads come springtime after the winter thaw. And one of our first jobs was to find aggregate for the road, fill that we could use to surface the roads. One of the guys noticed there was an old empty mine down the road with big slag heaps, and we could use that slag to pave the roads. After we'd hauled all the rock away and paved the roads, we found out that it was unprocessed gold ore. And our unit was fined $5 million by the Korean government because we had been replacing the roads with gold in Korea. My main duty in Korea was a blacksmith. There are probably not half a dozen in the whole army anymore. But my job was a blacksmith. I had a small shop, and my job, of course, was doing repair work. Anything that was broken was fixed because we couldn't replace it, so we had to repair everything. Our unit, one of the things we did was anywhere we found a burnt out vehicle, Jeep, truck, whatever, we'd drag it back to our compound. Our mechanics would tear it apart, and with all the spare parts, we managed to make 12 2.5-ton trucks out of scrap. And then our colonel would trade the trucks to the infantry units for 50 caliber guns and BARs and things. Our engineer unit wasn't authorized for any of those heavy weapons. So by rebuilding trucks and trading them for heavy weapons, we became a very heavily armed unit. Our section, we had about 30 men out of the 100 in our unit was in the section that I was in. Other sections, some of the other men were sent to, because we're the ash and trash unit, we were sent to take care of generals. The generals had trailers where they'd move them as the front moved, they'd move the trailers back and forth. And our unit was supposed to take care of the generals by connecting up running water and electricity to all their little trailers. And so our job was just to keep the generals happy, including things like making parking places for the generals with their little stars on them so nobody else would take their places. After about 9 months in Korea, we packed up, and I packed up. They promoted me to corporal when they shipped me home, so I wouldn't have to do KP on the ship home. So then after I got out of the service that time, I went back to Bradley and finished my degree at Bradley University.
My name is Dave Hanson. I retired back in 2009 after serving for 31 years. I retired at the rank of Master Gunnery Sergeant. I originally enlisted in 1978. When I was 17 years old, my mom signed for me. I wanted to be a Marine since I was a little kid when I read a book in the library. And when I came home from school that day, I told my mom I was going to be a Marine. And she kind of laughed and thought, okay, a 7-year-old kid, what does he know? But that was my goal, to be a Marine. And when I enlisted in 1970, like I said, I was still 17. I attended basic training at Parris Island, South Carolina. Went into the infantry field, 0311, rifleman. I was assigned to 3-5 Marines, Dark Horse, out of Camp Pendleton. But I served from 1970 to 2009. I retired at the rank of Master Gunnery Sergeant. And I was in Beirut, Lebanon in 1983 when the Marine barracks got blown up. I wasn't in the barracks itself, but I saw it happen. I was also in Desert Storm. I did 3 deployments to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, primarily in infantry field. I did a couple tours in the drill field as a drill instructor. My time in the service has served me very well. It's taught me to take responsibility, to be held accountable, to always give 110% to whatever I do. In my opinion, I think, people always say, someone should go in the military to turn their lives around. Well, the military is not meant for everybody. I've seen people in the Marine Corps that they shouldn't be there. They just they don't have the right motivation, I guess. I've also been wounded a couple times, unfortunately. I call my Purple Hearts the medal where I didn't get out of the way quick enough. But I love being a Marine, even though I'm retired. What does it say in the Marine Corps? Once a Marine, always a Marine. Has my experiences changed me? Yeah, definitely. I'm not as happy-go-lucky as I used to be. And I still deal with some health issues because of my injuries received. And I've undergone a number of surgeries. Unfortunately, I'm still dealing with health issues. For a while, it was really beating me down. But like I said, one of the things I learned in the Marine Corps was to improvise, adapt, and overcome. And I still apply that to my life today. I still have to deal with a lot of issues, PTSD being one of them. I had a brain injury, and I've had a couple strokes since then. And I unfortunately suffer from seizures as well. And I have to take more medications than I ever thought would be possible in my life. And sometimes, yeah, it does depress me. It definitely gets me down. There was a time a number of years ago when I was drinking every day. I was a really severe alcoholic. And I didn't even know I had PTSD. All I knew was that I was angry all the time, very antisocial. And I'm very fortunate in the respect that I met this wonderful woman about 11 years ago. And she was the impetus to make me want to be a better person. I had to stop drinking, of course. I'm not angry like I used to be. I'm more understanding now. And I really work hard at trying to be a better person. Would I ever, do I ever regret serving? Never. Do I ever regret going through what I went through? No. It's what I signed up for. And I'm very glad that I did so. I try to take the negatives and turn them into positives. And my heart goes out to other veterans. And the one thing I want to say too is I've had a lot of people say, I wish I could have served. And my response is, well, do you support those who have served? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, that's great, because in a way, that's your service to this country, is to support those that serve. And as a veteran, I want to say thank you for that. Greatly appreciated. One of the things that bothers me too was when people say, well, thank you for your service. I always kind of have a hard time with that. And the reason being is because I didn't look to receive any recognition. I did it because I thought that was the right thing to do for me. Not that I don't appreciate the thanks, which I do. I just, I did it because it's something that I felt that I had to do, and that's my own personal opinion. But for those of you who are considering serving in the armed forces, I would highly recommend you take a good hard look at yourself and what your reasons are, your motivations, and look at the different branches of the armed forces. Don't just rush in and make a decision, because each branch of the armed forces has their own specialties and stuff like that. And it's always good to try to make the best informed decision. So yeah, that's about it for me.
I'm Ronald Hastings. I was in the Air Force from 54 to 58. I spent 3 years in England at an old Air Force base, old Second World War Air Force base. I was part of a maintenance department of the armament. It was the 79th Fighter Bomber Squadron. Well, I did enjoy it over there. We pulled maintenance on the fighter bombers, usually the 84 Fs. We held them the most of the time I was there. And just before I left, we got the F-100s. Sight and radar was my department, and we just maintain these aircraft. We had targets in Russia. So there were 17 targets that we had nuclear weapons. That's about all I got there.
I'm James Spencer. I was in the U.S. Navy from December of 1950 till November of 1954, and I was a mineman. And a lot of people don't know what minemen are, but it's the older type of mines was a lot different than what I was used to. I was the mines that we worked on and took care of were laid by aircraft rather than ships, and so it was a lot different than what a lot of people thought it was. And after I got out of boot camp, I went to mine warfare school in Yorktown, Virginia. And it was a 16-week school, and after I got out of school, they shipped me 8 miles to the Naval Mine Depot. But it was over there we repaired mine mechanisms and different things. Worked on mines. We assembled them, and then I was down there for 2.5 years, and then I went overseas to Okinawa, and I was in a support unit for mine laying aircraft, and mostly what we did was we had an area that we would take care of with things called a theodolite. It's a little thing that you look through and triangulate. We triangulated. Anyway, what we were doing, we're really qualifying these planes that we supported for laying a minefield with aircraft. And then after I got out of that, I came home, went to Caterpillar. So spent 37 years at Caterpillar. So that's about all I have to say.
Okay, my name is Gary Hall. I was drafted into the Army, April the 17th, 1968, out of Pekin, Illinois. At that time, that was the largest contingency of draftees that they had in the Tazewell County area. They had the Journal-Star there. They had 3 stations, 25, 19, and 31 was there. There was 3 busloads of us. We went down to St. Louis. We got our physicals. I'd say about 90-95% of us passed the physicals, and except for 3 of us, we went to Fort Leonard. The 3 that were drafted, they went in the Marines. I was lucky enough not to go in the Marines. Anyway, Fort Leonard, they got us all situated, and the next morning we got up and we started taking tests. And after the test, they went ahead and they decided that I was myself and about a dozen others was scored real well on the test. So they went ahead and offered me officer's candidate school. After the guy had got done telling me how smart I was, he wanted me to sign up for officer's candidate school. When I saw that I was going to be in there for 3 going on 4 years, I said, wait a minute, you guys came for me, I didn't come for you. So I said, I wasn't going to sign that paper. So he kind of smiled and he says, so what do you want to do while you're in the service? I said, get out. He says, so what'd you do before this? I said, well, I worked at a grocery store, I did this, I did that. I was working at Caterpillar putting parts on the line. So he says, how'd you like to be in supply? I said, sounds okay with me. So after being in Fort Leonard Wood for basic training, I went to Fort Lee, which is, they train people for supply at Fort Lee for all the services. Marines, Air Force, Navy, everybody that gets trained in supply gets trained at Fort Lee, at least at that time. So when I got out, graduated from that, I had orders for Vietnam, and went to Vietnam as a specialist for people that graduated from the supply training. I went from an E2, E1 when you first get in there, E2 when I got out of basic. I went from an E2 to an E4 because of being in supply. I got over to, we landed in Saigon. From Saigon, they told me I wasn't going to be in regular supply. They put me in medical supply. I ended up with 32nd Med, which was the only medical depot in Vietnam. Everybody got medical supplies from us. The Air Force did, the Marines did, the Army, of course. Koreans got them from us, the Turks got it from us, the Australians got them from us, the Arvans got them from us, medical supplies. And I'm not too sure, but I think if we was looking if we wasn't looking real close, sometimes the enemy got them from us, you know. So I was in Cameron Bay in 1968, and Bob Hope and Ann Margaret and the Gold Diggers showed up. I got to talk to Ann Margaret. I was as close as I am to you. Anyway, really a nice lady. I mean, she be just like talking to anybody, you know. Now those Gold Diggers, they acted like they was prima donnas, you know. So anyway, and Bob Hope, he was telling some of his dumb jokes, and I'd get the punchline right away because I'd been watching Bob Hope since I was a kid. Well, that, like I said, that was a night show. I think the VC got upset because they weren't invited to watch him. So we had they hit Cameron Bay, and they hit it hard. I mean, there was all kinds of explosions and stuff going on all over the place. It was a wild scene. But after we got by that, maybe a couple weeks later, myself and two others got sent to from Cameron Bay to Quin Yon, another coastal city. I was there. I went up to Cameron Bay was a home base. Quin Yon was second platoon. Now let's see. Got up there and ended up getting put in charge of the receiving section. You know, you receive it, and then we'd put it in Connex containers. We'd put everything that began with an A and the A Connex and so on and so forth. And then we had other Connex containers that would be like, say, for the palm tree, or for the Iraqs, Koreans, or for the Turks, or for the Air Force or whatever. And if they had orders, something they'd ordered, we'd go ahead and pick it out and put it up there so that when they came, they could get their stuff and sign for it. Ended up with a Korean liaison being my roommate. He was with the Palm Tree Division. They had the Rocks, which were the ones that did all the fighting and stuff. Then the Palm Tree Division, that'd be like our supply guys and our people that do all the typing and everything. I found out, of course, everybody knows it now, but I found out that in Korea, it didn't make any difference who you were or how much money you had. You were going in the service. It didn't make any difference if you was male or female either. You went in the service for at least 2 years. This Korean liaison that was with me and worked at the receiving section with me, he, pretty smart guy. His dad was president of a bank in Seoul. So he had money, but I remember him telling me, I says, well, how'd you do on the rifle range? Oh, he says, Hall, he says, I did okay. I says, what would happen if you hadn't have succeeded on the rifle range? He says, you duck walk with a rifle on your back up the mountain. When you come back down and you fire, you generally pass your test. Your firing, you hit all the targets. Sorry. Anyway, he was a pretty good guy. In fact, him and I went to the Korean restaurant in Cameron Bay. No, not Cameron Bay, in Quinyon. So what happens when you get old? You get confused. Anyway, in Quinyon. And I had ate at a Korean restaurant with him. And I taught him, when he first came, he was pretty good with English as long as he could look it up in the book. After a couple of days, well, you know, I was raised in Creve Coeur, Illinois. And some of the things I was saying wasn't in his book. I took his book and threw it away. I said, just listen to what, I said, you're pretty smart. Just listen to what I say. I said, I'll teach you how to talk proper English. It only took me about 3 days. He was talking like he was raised in Creve Coeur, Illinois. Now we had a couple of Papasans that they were pretty good too. We had one guy, I'm going to go back to Cameron Bay. Maybe I better not tell that story. I will anyway. You can cut it out if you don't. He was a boy's son in Cameron Bay, and he was all the time, when we get our care packages in, all the time stealing candy. Cookies, candy, cakes. If you left it down, he'd get to it, he'd grab it. So at the time we had this diet candy. I think the name of it was AIDS or A. Begin with an A. Anyway, it looked just, so we put that in a candy box and told him not to eat it or mess with it. Well, sure enough, he ate the whole box. I'm telling you what, brother. When he came back 3 days later, he was as pale as a ghost. And he was very careful about, he didn't mess with our candy after that. What I like, I guess, now that I think about it, I like the idea that we had all these different people from different units and stuff. And you'd listen to all kinds of stories and stuff, you know. Of course, me being in supply, I'm not out there shooting at anybody. Did have one time when we had in Saigon, Quinyon. In Quinyon, they had like a square, kind of like what they got in Washington, the town of Washington. And they'd caught it was 3 Vietnamese in there, and they were VC. And supposedly one of them, I think everybody was related to Ho Chi Minh, was a relative of Ho Chi Minh. And they actually hung him right there in the square. I remember watching that, and you know, when you watch cowboy shows and you see them get like Clint Eastwood, it ain't the same when you're watching somebody really getting hung. One of them must have had a relative that was going to try and get him down. She got machine gunned. She laid right beside him. That was kind of a gory situation. We, let's see, what else? Oh, I remember going to the theater with Kim, and it was a Japanese movie, but it was in Vietnamese, and they had Korean subtitles. So here I am in a movie theater watching a movie. I mean, I can't understand or read what they're saying. And Kim, he's reading all the subtitles for me and telling me what's going on. I thought, ain't this something? So there was a situation where we actually got go into town one time, and when in Quinyon they had these. Every bar had a different type of music. You had country and western. There was jazz in another bar, rock and roll. Well, I'd been pushed. Country western was pushed on me my whole life, so I didn't want anything to do with Bill Monroe or any of those guys, you know. Well, these guys I was with, they was from down south, and they wanted to hear some country western. So we went to this one bar, and I'm listening to Chet Atkins, and I remember, oh boy, and I knew the words. So after one song of that, I told him, I says, you know what? I says, I'll buy the next 2 or 3 rounds if I have to. But right over here across the street on the next block is a bar where they got the Beatles and Ricky Nelson and Stones, some good music. Country, or not country music, but rock and roll. I think Chuck Berry, they had them too. Anyway, they says, okay, all right, if you're going to buy the next 2 or 3 rounds, we'll go. So we go over there, and we get set down, and I order the drinks. Before we even got the first drink, I heard aloud one of those explosions that just kind of rocks the whole room, almost like an earthquake, you know what I mean? So we go out, and man, there's stuff flying all over the place and whatever, and that bar that we was in, found out later somebody went in with a satchel charge and just blew the crap out of everything and everybody in it. I looked at my buddies and I said, well, I told you that country music wasn't no good for you. After that, whenever we went to the village or went to in town, I got to pick the bars. They didn't go to any other bar unless it was okay. We used to have, they would be ladies. They would be women that would come up to you. They were there to get you to buy them drinks. And if you didn't watch it, they'd try and get you to go up in the room with them. Then you'd come back. Some guys would come back with a knot on their head and no money. So, or they'd be buying. It was called Saigon tea. You thought you and her were getting whiskey. She was getting tea, and you were getting whiskey. So you'd get drunk, and that's been going on probably back in the old West. Dance hall girls would do stuff like that. So I wasn't really. While I was in the E5 boards came up, and because they wanted an E5 to be in charge of the receiving section, they sent me down for the E5 boards. Well, I got to go back down to Cameron Bay and see guys I hadn't seen in a few months, and I figured I'd just go ahead and do it, right? But this one sergeant told me, he says, thing about an E5 board or any kind of boards, if you don't know the answer and it's something to do with your job, he gave me 3 books to reference. He says, don't try and bullshit them, because these guys have been bullshitted by the best, and you're not that good. You're not the best bullshitter. So I said, okay. So I went ahead, and when I went to the E5 board, all I did was just answer the questions. If I didn't know it, I'd tell them, I don't know. Well, if you don't know it, and I said I'd refer to it, and I gave them a book that I'd refer to, which is really what I do in the first place. Well, to make a long story short, I got E5. So after I got the E5, Specialist 5, this one sergeant, re-up sergeant, he's trying to talk me into re-upping and staying in Vietnam, doing the same job I was doing. And I told him, I says, you know what? At Caterpillar, I make more in a week at 40 hours than I do in a month here in Vietnam. And nobody's telling me that I have to work a Saturday or Sunday. 8 hours, all I gotta work if I don't want, I'm not being forced to, not like here. So, he said, well, I tell you what, he says, if you go back now, you're gonna have to spend six months in the USA. Who knows where you'll go? Fort Leonard Wood, who knows? Maybe down to Texas for 6 months. But if you extend over here for another month and a couple of days, you'll have less than 5 months when you get out. So I tell everybody instead of spending 24 months in the service, I spent 19 months and 5 days. And I got out early. We landed in Seattle, Washington to get out. And after we landed, passed our physical, you got to be able to, they won't let you out of the service unless you can pass your physical. If there's something wrong with you, they're going to fix you before you go out. Like venereal diseases and stuff, or who knows, whatever. So anyway, they had us on a bus, took us to the airport, and they told us, there's going to be some people there that aren't very happy with you. I says, what'd I do to them? We all did. We said, what'd we do to them? Well, you were in Vietnam. That's all it took. So what you're going to do is you're going to march, with your uniform, and we had our greens on and stuff, dress uniforms. You're going to march to in there. You're going to find the plane you're supposed to get on to go wherever you're going, and you're not going to say anything to those people. Anyway, you're not going to do anything like that. So they were throwing stuff at us and cussing at us, calling us baby killers. I was a medical supply. I probably saved a baby's life or something, So I looked at those guys and I thought, boy, if I ever see you guys again. I got their faces still in my mind. Probably never will see them. But we went ahead and we got on that plane. I flew from there to Chicago, and then we transferred and flew down to Peoria. Landed in Peoria, and that was, when I got in Peoria, went over and I called home, and my brother Howard had the extra car because my dad was at work, and he was working, so I had to wait for him to get off work. So I went to, looked around and I thought, well, here I am, 20 years old. I've been drinking beer whenever I want to. I wanted to get me a Pabst Blue Ribbon beer. So I went to the bar. Of course, the airport wasn't as big as what it is now. I went to this bar in uniform, had my suitcase and all that stuff. Actually, it wasn't a suitcase, it was my bag with all my stuff in it from the Army. Anyway, I said, well, let's see if I can get a beer without without having to tell them I'm not old enough, because you had to be 21 to drink back then. So I said, I said, can I have a beer? get a beer? And he goes, sure. So I reached in my pocket. I was going to show him my military ID. Figured I could slide by with that, and get my money out, And he says, I don't need that. I says, okay. He said, I don't need your money either. He says, as far as I'm concerned, your money's not any good here. Okay. I'm sitting there and I think, well, I got myself a free drink. My brother Howard finally showed up. I was on my 5th or 6th beer. I still can't remember whether it was my 6th one. But I hadn't paid for a beer because people would come in. And as you can tell, if you've been paying attention, I'm pretty good at talking. So they would ask me stuff and I just answer them, tell them the truth. That was cool. Peoria was cool. Seattle, Washington? No. I heard stories from other friends of mine in Chicago about people giving them a hard time there. But I don't know of anybody that's landed in Peoria that told me, at least when I did, that they got cussed out and called baby killers and spit on. So, as far as I'm concerned, Peoria is okay as far as that goes.
My name's James ULRICH. I'm the commander of Peoria Post 2, American Legion. I never thought about the military when I was growing up at all. My father wasn't in the military. I had an uncle, but he didn't live near us. I was in college my sophomore year, and I got a letter from the draft board saying I had to go to Chicago for my Army physical. I didn't think anything about it. That was customary at the time. And so I went up to Chicago. I was playing football, Bradley. I rode up with another football player and a basketball player. And after we went through all of that and we were back on the train coming back home, the basketball player said, well, I passed. And I said, I passed. The other football player said, well, I failed. And so he said, the only reason I'm in college is to stay out of the draft, so I'm dropping out of school, which he did. I never gave it another thought for the next 2 years, my junior and senior year. And I graduated in January of 1969. So anyway, I'd never given the military that much thought, and now within 2 weeks I'm going to be in the Army. And I'd already graduated, so I had my life lined up. So I thought, well, I'm not going to run to Canada or anything like that. I'm going to honor my country, but how else can I do it besides spending 2 years in the Army? And so I ended up in the Marine Reserves, active duty for 6 months and then reserves for 5.5. I was trained to be a combat engineer. And then after I got through my boot camp and training, they changed my MOS to radio operator. And so that's what I was when I got out. I got out as an E4 corporal, and they tried to persuade me to re-up. They give me another stripe, but I was married at the time with a child, and I wanted to get on with my life. So I was never activated while in the reserve, so I never went overseas. But I was trained to do so if the call had come. And so that's my military experience. However, since I've been in the Legion and been in the Honor Guard, I see how many people respect the military when we do Honor Guard. And we do between 70 and 100 of them every year. And it's rewarding to see the people accept the flag and see the firing, the 3 volleys, and to hear taps played for their loved one. So that's about all that I can say. We're having trouble finding younger people to join the Legion. Most all of us that are active here now are in our 70s or 80s, and we have some in their 90s. So whoever's watching this, and if you're in the Peoria area, feel free to come in and talk to us, and we'd love to have you. Even though you're married and have a family, you could help us on not every day of every week, but whenever your schedule permits it, and we'd love to have you here.
Lord Curtis, half left, ready, and fire.